All right, welcome to Bleav in Chargers. Rolling solo today, and a big thank you to our friends at FanDuel for putting us on. Was just going through the FanDuel odds. Interesting. The Chargers have been dinged a little bit in free agency. Their over/under win totals were at 10.5, now down to 9.5. So if you find that to be a value for a team that's gone back-to-back 11-win seasons, and you feel good about the addition of Mike McDaniel and what they have on their roster right now prior to the draft and prior to that second wave of free agency, maybe get in on that and find yourself a little bit of a value because their Super Bowl odds are still the same. They've actually jumped a little bit. They were plus 1,600. Now they are plus 1,500. So try to get all that to reconcile, and that's part of, getting after it, right? Is there some sort of wrinkle in the market? And with the Chargers down to 9.5, they still have better odds to win the Super Bowl at FanDuel right now, plus 1,500, than the Kansas City Chiefs, who have a win total of 10.5. So if you want to chase that. If you feel like there's some incongruity there, maybe something you can take advantage of right now. But a big thank you to our friends at FanDuel for putting it on, and a big thank you to all of you. This is a live, so I'm going to be interacting with a lot of people through the comments, but I just figured opportunity for us to catch up on free agency. Had a few more signings this week, a couple more departures, and figured we'll detail those first. And then I think it's just kind of getting into an overview of what the approach, what I have no insight. I have not had any conversations with anyone inside the organization about what their philosophy has been. It's just sort of been my observation and my interpretation of what I see, knowing what I know about Joe Ortiz from spending some time with him, from the school of general managing that he comes from in Baltimore, from his press conferences, from his interviews, from our individual conversations about what he values, how he wants to build a football team. I think we know. I'll just start with offensive line. We know what Jim Harbaugh wants to do. He said it. He's on record. Offensive line is a weapon. Tip of the spear. We're drafting Joe Alt. Offensive line can be a weapon. And I think that primarily has shown itself through the tackles, making Rashan Slater the highest paid on an average annual value tackle in the league, and drafting Joe Alt with the 5th overall pick. So I think those two transactions, a top 5 pick on a tackle when you already had a standout left tackle to play right tackle in Joe Alt, and then paying Rashan Slater not only the market rate, but setting a new market rate, shows that you're committed to that particular position group. And then I think interior line is a little bit different. Letting typically draft, develop, re-sign has always been an approach the Chargers have taken. And Zion was a draft, a develop, and by all accounts, someone that Coach Harbaugh really liked a lot, added a lot to this team. I know his play was inconsistent, I think is probably how I would describe it. And I thought he was, I don't want to say incredible, very good as a run blocker, especially when he was teamed up with Rashan Slater. The left side of that line was a weapon, to use a term that Jim Harbaugh has used in the past. But the pass blocking left a lot to be desired, particularly on stunts, some of those quick pressures. And I think that continued to dog him. Did have a nice little run at the end of the season last year, but unfortunately it showed up again in that playoff game against New England. So he departs, and Mekhi Becton departs, and that wasn't a surprise to anyone for the amount of money that it was going to cost to bring him back versus what they got from him, the inconsistency and availability, and just the inconsistency at play. So those guys out and in, I don't think there's any question. We went through it before. The addition of Tyler Batish is going to be an absolutely massive upgrade from what we've seen at the center position the last 2 years. So as long as Joe Alt and Rashan Slater are healthy, that's going to be a huge upgrade. Tyler Batish over Bradley Bozeman, taking a jump from, someone who was performing at a league low level at that position to someone who could just be league average. And I think Batish has been better than league average. He's kind of been in that top half, maybe even top third of the league. Is going to be a massive jump. And I know Daniel Papa wrote about this, and it's something that we've talked about here on Bleav in Chargers in the past. And that is that, you sign Cole Strange, and you sign him to what looks like a low-end starter contract, or at least a competition when the league opens. You're going to be, the odds-on favorite to win that job at right guard, but we may bring in some competition through the draft for you to ensure that you win that job. And if you don't, then you're a pretty high-paid backup, but a very good contingency plan should injury arrive. And Strange was signed on, I would assume, the specific recommendation of Mike McDaniel and Butch Berry, the offensive line coach. Butch Berry comes over from Miami to coach the offensive line. Nick Hardwick, an assistant still. And Mike McDaniel, the offensive coordinator, who had Strange and said, yeah, we like him. We like the way he moves. He fits what we do. Let's sign him. You're not going to do it without his approval. Left guard is still, I think, open. Trevor Penning, to me, is not a tackle. I think he's a guard and a sixth offensive lineman. I like him in that sixth offensive lineman role. But I would say, as it stands right now, he goes into the season as the starter at left guard ahead of Branson Taylor. When you look at the depth chart right now, the offensive line, I think you still need to add to it. You currently have Ben Cleveland as your backup right guard, someone who didn't play a whole lot of football in the 4 years that he was in Baltimore, part of the Joe Ortiz. Joe Ortiz, part of the group that drafted him in that third round. You have Josh Kaltenberger as your backup center and Branson Taylor's your backup guard. I do think Branson showed enough throughout the course of the season and talking to the coaches, his development in shifting from tackle to guard, that they'd feel okay with him as a backup. But I do think you're going to probably be looking for some additions and some competition. And I think a higher day 2, maybe even day 1 if things break your way draft pick to add to that position group. Pipkins is beloved in that room. I had heard that his market was just around $3.5 million outside, that he had a couple offers that were coming in, maybe just under that, 3.4, 3.5 million range. So he's one of Slater's best friends. Justin really gets along well with him. Joe Alt gets along really well with him. And I think when Trey is healthy, he's a viable swing tackle. So to bring him back on essentially what's a 3.65 one-year deal made a whole lot of sense. So that's kind of where we're at just on offensive line. Now, that's what everybody wants to start with. I've talked about it. Would I have liked to have seen them commit some more resources there? Yeah. For me personally, I do think the Elton Jenkins contract, I know that he's dealing with an injury, but you can void it the first day of the league year after you put him through a physical if you don't like what you see. And clearly the Browns are fine with it because he's now officially signed after the start of the league year. So even though the Packers may have moved on from him because of the injury or whatever they want to do, retooling with that offensive line, I thought that was one that really stood out to me as good value, especially with tackle guard flexibility, which is what they like. I think the Wyatt Teller contract, especially, the fact that both of those guys aren't going to count against your comp pick formula made a lot of sense. Now, I do think as I look and I still think there are some players out there, Bitonio, Zeitler, Glasgow, that all make sense in this offense that could still be signed. Chris Paul, I think, based on the recommendation of Tyler Batish, who played next to him all last year in Washington, makes sense to bring in. And now they just may be part of and I don't know exactly which of those guys individually are part of the comp pick formula and which aren't. So you may wait for that expiration date. I think it's early May to pass and work something out with the agent like, hey, let's wait till now. I want my comp picks. We'll sign you for this. If you want to hold out, if you get anything better, let us know and we'll sign you. So I think that comes into play. So that's offensive line, I think. I feel better about the offensive line going into 2026 than I did I shouldn't say that. Going into 2025, before the injuries to Slater and Alt, I felt pretty good about it, about having Becton, about Zion, taking a step. I did not feel good about Bradley Bozeman. That was a concern. So I do feel a lot better, considerably better about Batish. It's kind of where I'm at on that front. So I do think there's still a free agent deal to be made. Greg Van Roten, I think, could factor in there as I'm looking through all of them. But yeah, to me, the ones that stand out, Chris Paul, Zeitler, if you can convince him to come to the West Coast, Bitonio, Glasgow, who played at Michigan, Van Roten, I think you can make a case for these guys are just old. Bitonio's 35, Zeitler's 36, Van Roten's 36. Chris Paul's young, 28. That could make a lot of sense. So yeah, I do think there's going to be another signing. I think it's just a matter of, and just quickly on the comp pick thing, it's a tough one for me, right? Because I look at, Joe Ortiz in his 2 years here. He's been really good. He's been really good in the draft. I think he's hit his first 2 first-round picks out of the park Joe Alt, no question, right? I think we can all visualize him being the best tackle in football. Omarion Hampton, I've seen enough. I think he can be the best running back in football. I Bleav he has that level of talent. Even with the slow start last year and a couple games where he didn't even play the full game, even if I amortize and project his stats, had he played all 17 from those 9 games, I get averages of 1,400 scrimmage yards and 10 total touchdowns, about 1050 rushing and about 350 or 450 receiving, and 8 total rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns. And I think that's low. So I think he's hit his 2 picks, his 2 ones out of the park. His 2s feel the same way. I think Ladd McConkey can be a 1,500-yard, 10-touchdown receiver in Mike McDaniel's offense this upcoming season. I think Tre Harris is going to be special. He's so smart. He does everything. He's got sure hands. He comes up with clutch catches. He blocks his ass off. I'm a huge Tre Harris fan. I think he's going to step up into a wide receiver 2 role. His 3rds, Jamari Caldwell, I think was a home run pick. Junior Colson, obviously incomplete. Desperately need to see something from Junior because that's a deep linebacking room already with the way that, Jesse Minter played defense, and we assume Chris O'Leary's going to play defense with Dan Henley, Delshon Phillips, Marlo Wax, and Denzel Perriman brought back in that room. So you're going to need to see something out of him in training camp. And again, Popper and I always joke with one another because when we see him on the field in training camp, we're like, my God, like first guy off the bus, Junior Colson. So hopefully appendix his first year, foot last year. Can he get past that? 4th round picks. Even with a Boygby, right? Where it was like a redshirt year, his rookie year. I mean, bounces back with 6 sacks last year. Played really well. So I feel good about a Boygby and kind of where he ended up in his second year. Can Kennard do the same? Don't know. But it worked there. 5th round picks. Obviously, Tarheeb still. Cam Hart. Feel good about that, especially Tarheeb. And obviously, Aronde Gadsden. I think KLS, Keandre Lambert-Smith, will be expected with that speed to do something in this offense with Mike McDaniel. 6th round picks, R.J. Mickens, a couple interceptions. Didn't think he looked overwhelmed at the safety spot and a viable special teams contributor year before Kamani Vidal. And we know how well he played. So, excuse me. A little bit of a cough there. My apologies. Let me wash that down. So I set all that up to say I do think there's a certain arrogance that goes with comp picks. Like, yeah, I can do more with pick 100 and pick 130 than signing more of these free agents. I would rather have an extra 2 bites at the apple in the 3rd or the 4th and the 5th than losing that. Because basically what you're doing right now, based on the comp pick formula, and look, a lot of it is going to get balanced out on playing time, but like just from the money for Oweh, and what we think is going to be playing time, I think that can end up being a 3rd. I think it's more likely a 3rd than a 4th. It could be a 4th. But to me, it's just like, would you trade a 3rd round pick for Odafe Oweh? They traded a 5th for him, right? And Alohi Gilman. So I think that's kind of where you get into it. Like, do you want to trade a 4th round pick for Joel Bitonio or any of those guys that are going to factor into the comp pick formula? And I think that's sort of where they get into it. And for me, I do think there's a certain amount of arrogance of, yeah, we could really use this player right now, but I would really like to have that pick so I can put my name on it. And that's my guy that I got with these comp picks. So there's a bunch of different ways to look at it. I see someone mention Chris Paul. Oh, Chris Paul re-signed with the Commanders. So there you go. That one's out the window. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at with that. So just quickly, Charlie Kolar, I think, is going to be a star in this offense. I think you're going to see him be a lot more productive in the passing game. He blocks his tail off, man. And I don't know if the Chargers posted it yet, but we did a little breakdown with he and Ingold and what they're going to mean. And I think you have to factor those two in to the offense and protection, pass protection, and the run game, along with offensive linemen. So to me, like that's part of it. If you're not happy with the guards, you can be happy with the center, the blocking tight end, the fullback, and how they're going to function in Mike McDaniel's offense. I mentioned Cole Strange, Tyler Batish. Keaton Mitchell is we were wondering, and Mike McDaniel said, "Oh, I don't necessarily need speed. He needs speed. He needed some speed out there, and Keaton Mitchell's got it as much as anybody in the league." And you see what his backs in Miami do, and Achane and now to have Keaton Mitchell to be able to do that, along with Omarion Hampton and Kimani Vidal, that's going to be a fun room with the addition of Mitchell. Not to mention the return ability. So that's someone who's going to challenge Double D Darius Davis, who I think was banged up all last year for those return opportunities. So I love that. And just kind of sticking with that theme, to take care of Ryan Ficken after what he had to go through last year, to re-sign Josh Harris, to re-sign Dean Leonard, one of the best gunners in the league, to re-sign Delshon Phillips, one of the best special teams players. Just if you were to have a special team Pro Bowler, I think he very well should have been the guy that got that nod. So to get Harris, Leonard, and Phillips back, I think is a big win. Obviously, bringing Khalil Mack back, a monster get. I think they're going to redo these contracts. If you're asking about that $54 million they still got, you're going to get new contracts for both Derwin and Thule. I think they'll get those done, and that'll eat into that a little bit. You already got Tierra Tart signed. I thought that was priority number one. Love that they're bringing back Unk. Tony Jefferson, so important in that room. Dalvin Tomlinson added to that defensive line as that nose tackle allows Tierra Tart to just maximize that get off. He's so quick off the snap and penetrating that I like him more at that 3 instead of that nose. And yeah, so there we go. I think that's kind of our thumbnail now. If I'm missing anything, feel free to update me in the comments. But let's get to some of these. We got Unk back. Why does Joe hate Herbs? Like, I don't think he hates Herbs. I think it's to me, I do think that this is a head coach of the offense conversation, that this is a Mike McDaniel target some guards that you need. And it looks like they're in the market for weapons. And that they were rumored to be sniffing around some wide receiver trades and availability. And so I think McDaniel's probably looking a little bit more at weapons, and he probably looked at Kohler as a weapon, like, hey, that's a big priority for me. So I think they went out and got him. And so I think that's where Cole Strange comes in. And I think if you look historically at offensive line for a lot of these Shanahan-style offenses, there are big investments in tackle and not as big investments in guard. It's a pretty standard characteristic. McVay's a little bit different because I think McVay's been running a lot more power and a lot more of that big-bodied offensive line than the other guys have been running. So that's sort of, I think, what a big part of this is. And you're kind of investing in Mike McDaniel and what his evaluations are and what his needs are, and how he wants to spend the money. So that's kind of where Dan, hopefully that answers the question. And again, would I like more protection thinking about the playoffs and what's happened in those 2 playoff games? Yes, I would, but I'm not in those meetings, and I don't know what kind of Coach Barry and Coach McDaniel have said about what they need and what they think they can work with. A lot of Tony Jefferson, love that. What's up, Brandon? What's up, M11007M11? Evening Money, Unk is running it back. Yeah, a lot of excitement about Tony Jefferson, as there should be. And it was something we said repeatedly during the broadcast, DJ and I, right? Like, good things happen. When that guy's on the field, good things happen. And the players love him. It's great chemistry. I think it's very similar to Khalil Mack in that there's just certain guys, these veterans that have been around for a while that have such a positive impact on a lot of these young players. Khalil Mack on specifically Thule and what he's turned into, one of the best defensive linemen in the league, all-around defensive lineman that can play up and down that defensive lineman that can play up and down that defensive line. They can sack the quarterback. They can create pressures for others. Mack has been pivotal. We know about his relationship with Tarheeb Still and what he got out of him. And I think Tony Jefferson's the same way, that he does have, that he does mean quite a bit to these guys. So I love having him back. Explain to me what we're thinking about junior LB spot is a question mark. I don't think so. Tay, I think the linebacker room is pretty darn good. I think we know what Denzel is, right? He's going to be out there on obvious rundowns. I don't think there's going to be a high snap count there. Dayon is a borderline Pro Bowler. I thought he came on strong at the end of the season. I thought he had a strong start to the season, got a little up and down in the middle of it, but we know his 2024 was fantastic. So I got a lot of faith in Dayon. I've got faith in Marlowe Wax based on what we saw at practice, what we saw in the preseason, what we saw when he got his opportunity against Denver. I'd like to see him get snaps. And on top of that, Delshon Phillips, when he was put into a full-time role as opposed to just special teams ace, I thought he was fantastic. So I'm fine with that room, which is why I think Junior's going to be fighting. So for a spot, but I know what they think. And look, if you just go back and watch what Junior Colson meant to that national championship team, he was arguably the most important person on the field defensively. And you could make a case one of the most important people on the field on either side of the ball. So still that guy. It's just, can you overcome the injuries and the setbacks to kind of pick up your NFL career without having played really in 2 years? And I think there's a lot of hope there. Always an optimist, says Will. Missing out on Teller and these other guards is baffling. Yeah, again, Will, I think, it's something, and that was, 20 minutes ago. So for me, that was something that, again, I'm just going to say you have the money. We know the talent for the players. It happened last year. Didn't work out for the Chargers. Didn't work out for the teams that signed Will Fries and Carpenter and a lot of those interior offensive linemen. So it kind of didn't work out either way. I'd be very surprised if that were the case this year. If it didn't work out for Jenkins or Zion or Teller or Paul or some of these other guys that got signed. Reisner would have been a nice one. That was a nice low money deal, but he went back to the Bengals. Who else is out there that got signed? Yeah, so I think Ed Ingram, like that one I wasn't crazy about. They brought him back. But, yeah, I think that's TBD. And the draft, of course, is a big part of that. I do think you can find day 2 guards that you can plug and play, especially if they're dropped in between Batish and Alt or Batish and Slater. I think you're going to be able to find a rookie that can come in, compete, win a job, and play well, especially if you get Ione to fall to them at 22, which I don't think is likely. I've been running it here. You know what? Let's just do it real quick. I've been running a lot of these mock draft simulators, and I have yet to have Ione fall to me. So if I just pop 22 right now, let's see if we get lucky here and whether or not he'll fall. And he did not. Now, I've been running this thing constantly, and he's been off the board anywhere between 14 to the Bills, 15 to the Bucks. Is he on the? No, he's gone. And here, where's he end up going? Yeah, Fano's not falling. This one he went to 10 and went at 10 to the Bengals. So to me, like if you can get it to line up, if those tackles are there, like right now, what am I looking at here? Caden Proctor's there. I don't think he's a very natural fit for a wide zone offense. He's so big. But if you have someone that values him as a tackle guard flex, Blake Miller is still on the board here. If you want someone to trade up, they're not going to trade up for a safety. Tackle is what they would trade up for, or a wide receiver. Mekhi Lemon's off the board. Omar Cooper, who is really rising right now, could be someone that a team would trade up for. So if you can do that like this, I'm just going to make the trade for the Seahawks. We'll give them 22. We'll take 32 and 64, offer it. It's accepted. Now let's see if we can get, and Pregnon's there. And so that's something I think they can do. Basantis, Pregnon, can you get Jennings Dunker in the second? And I think those guys could come in, compete, and win the job. And you'd feel pretty darn good about it. Now, if Ione's there at 22, I would sprint the card and turn it in. Obviously, it would depend on who else was sitting there. Edge, I think, is a need with the departure of Owe and the age of Mac, where if there's a TJ Parker there, interior line is another one. We've heard about how smitten they were with Caleb Banks, who's been sliding lately. He's still on the board here at 32 when, I mentioned we could take Pregnon in this particular mock draft or Basantis. You could take Caleb Banks there as well. So I think it'll depend on who's there. I'm not crazy about swinging for the home run in the first round. I like the idea of just let's put it in play and let's get a base hit, man. Let's get a double. Can we get an extra base hit and be in scoring position? I'm fine with that. The idea of taking that swing where maybe there's not a lot of production or there's been an injury or, the traits are there, but the production isn't. The production's there, but the traits are a little Those sort of things make me a little bit nervous. Starting guards, there's a lot of that. Yes, I agree. You cannot. I think Dan, and I've said it on this podcast enough for people to know where I'm coming from. My number one goal this offseason would have been to make sure that Herbert has everything he needs to have a monster year. that after the last two playoff performances, especially after last year, the way he got his head caved, that is going to be slightly resolved because of the addition of Batish and the departure of Bozeman, who really struggled last year. So many of those quick pressures were on him. So many defensive lines were putting their edge rushers right over the center and just coming straight up the gut because it was just that leaky, particularly that Giants game I'm thinking of, where it was so obvious and uncomfortable even that, yeah, you got edge rushers that are lined up opposite Bozeman this entire game, that once that's gone, and I think Bozeman struggled too with a lot of the protections last year where you just had guys coming free over and over again that are going to be cleaned up. So that along with the scheme, more easy buttons, not 7-step drops, not 5-step drops out of shotgun. You're going to have a lot more easy buttons going for Herbert to just avoid. Like the Dolphins offensive line was not great. It became great, right? Brewer was an undrafted player at center, and he's arguably the best center in the league. That's something that Butch Berry developed and Mike McDaniel helped develop. And Tua took half the sacks and half the hits of Herbert last year. So the ball's going to come out, and that's just naturally going to bring, that sort of issue down. But again, like I said, I've said it. Number one goal would be to protect him, and I think that's what the additions of Kohler, the additions of Ingold, the addition of Keaton Mitchell, where you're going to have an exceptional run game to go with Herbert, where defenses are no longer going to be on their toes. They can't afford to be with this run game that Mike McDaniel's going to bring in, considering what you have at tackle, the talent you have at running back, the additions of Ingold and Kohler. I do think you're going to have defenses not pinning their ears back and firing off the snap coming after Herbert. So I think that's a big part of it. You have to assume, Leo, that all these guys are going to be healthy. It's just, you can't go into a season assuming they're not. Hey, I'm going to go into the season assuming that they're not going to be healthy. That's why you build depth. You don't sign starters behind them. You sign depth pieces behind them. And that's what I'm talking about. And that's why Trey Pipkins is back. And I do think that's why you could see at least 2 offensive linemen picked in this year's draft. Even though they only have 5 picks, I wouldn't be surprised to see them trade back, pick up a couple more. But I think minimum 2 offensive linemen and probably signing 1 more is what we're going to be talking about to get the depth. The guard spots, Dan, I've got way too many Dans in here, so let's kind of move on from him. If Fano's on the board, I would sprint to get him. I cannot imagine a world in which he is. I know his arm's measured a little bit short, but like he's a freaking beast. So I would be floored if he found his way out of the top 10, top 15 at worst. But if he's there, yes, I will sprint that card in, even if Mesidor's there. Let's see what else we got. $50 million cap space. Trade for a wide receiver. I do think that's on the board. I think it depends what the cost is. Brown, Ayuk, Brian Thomas. I think any of those would be incredible additions to Mike McDaniel's offense. I think it just depends what the cost is. We heard that New England offered the Eagles their first, and the Eagles turned it down. That means Chargers would have to offer him 22 to get A.J. Brown. Would I trade a 1 for A.J. Brown? Probably. I'd be comfortable with that. And I think he'd be exceptional with his skill set, Herbert's arm, and Mike McDaniel's brain. That'd be a lot of fun. Yes, Chris Paul, I got wrong. QJ, huge step. Shown us anything. Let your favorite player walk. You see the Chargers resign. Well, I think here's the question, Tay, is are you going to pick up that 5th-year option? Because if you're not, then you're essentially going into the year, and maybe you offer him a fair market deal if you think he's going to continue to build like he has in each of the last 2 seasons and gotten better last year than he was the year before. The year before he got better, obviously, than his rookie season. If you offer him at a number that you're comfortable with to be a wide receiver 3, then I think QJ is a great wide receiver 3. Telling me I can get my wide receiver 3 to give me between 8 and 10 touchdowns and around 800 to 900 yards, I'm great with that. That works for me, and especially if he doesn't have to be the X and be the downfield guy, because that's still not what he's great at. So, but the point being, like, if you're going to let him walk, what's the comp pick going to be? It's going to be a 4th. It's going to be a 5th. So do you take that this year, a year early, or do you wait for that comp pick to come in when he signs somewhere else, because you're not going to pick up his 5th-year option? So I think that's kind of the debate that has to happen inside that building. if we have someone offering us a 4th right now for QJ or a 5th for QJ, do we take it? Or do we think he's going to have another solid season and then we'll just get that pick for the 2028 draft when he walks? What else we got? Money, if you were a betting man, position targets from now until the draft, success, failure of free agency acquisitions. Well, I was going to say safety, but they brought back, because they need a safety, they brought back Tony. So I don't know. OTC is not updated because they had Chris Paul not being signed yet, so I missed that. So let me see if I can get an idea of what's out there at safety still, because I do think that could be something that they could address, just because of how often they play Derwin as a big nickel and a dime backer. So that'd be one I would look at. I think a corner could still make sense, kind of that physical corner to take the place of St. Juste is something that they most definitely could still go out there and find. So I think that's, and I'm not going to go through the names just because I don't know if this has been updated or not, so my apologies on that front. But yeah, corner, safety, edge, I think, a low cost, doesn't factor into the comp formula edge is something that they could take a look at. Leonard Floyd kind of got, you know what those Baltimore edges look like, right? Strong, can hold the point of attack, good setting the edge in the run. So I think there's, Floyd fits into that. Yeah, so I think there's a handful of those guys out there. But yeah, to me, it's more defensive side because they've shown that they're not in a hurry to get a guard. So even though I would say guard would be my number one, it just doesn't look like that's something that they're after. I don't think there's any real free agent wide receivers that make a whole lot of sense based on what, comp pick plus what they would add. So there's that. First time catching a live. Thanks for all you do. Big love from Australia. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. I have no idea what time it is there, but if it's, no, I think it's the morning, right? It's the morning of the 19th. So thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. Was hoping that we were going to be playing the Rams down there this year, but remember the Diehard Bolt Club. This is Rivers Forever. I agree. 17 forever. Diehard Bolt Club San Diego. Everyone is a huge fan. Listen to both your podcasts, this one and weekly. It's like gospel. Thank you very much. I'm going to be down there, as a matter of fact. Rivers Forever. My daughter, who did the intro for this on the guitar, is playing a gig on Friday night at the I keep wanting to say the Orpheum. It's not the Orpheum. Observatory at North Park. She's going on at like 7:38. So very much looking forward. I love San Diego. So we may spend the night down there, maybe go surf Oside Pier or something like that in the morning, play a little bit of golf. But yeah, appreciate you. E-Dub in here. Appreciate you, E-Dub. Same thing with you. William Escobar. Can you give us an overview of your favorite players in the draft? Remember, you were heavy on Zabel last year. Turned out to be a great player in Seattle. Yeah, I think for me, it's just more focusing on who would be available. And so, look, it's easy, right? Ioane is there, run it in. If for whatever reason Final falls, run it in. I think if for whatever reason, and I just can't see it happening, if Mekhi Lemon were to slide, I would run that thing in. I think he's a legitimate potential number one receiver. So that's one that I would probably sprint in. I like Sadiq. I think the juice that Sadiq brings, he'd be a really fun weapon because I do think they still need that third tight end, right? I think that's something that they could probably use. Kohler, Sadiq, Gadsden, I think that's a great tight end room. So that's one. I like both the guard. Like, to me, there's a handful of, I think Pregnon, Basantis, I think you could drop both of them in there. I think Jennings Dunker, you could drop in there and be fine with that. Let me get all my IO lines in here. I think, so yeah, to me, there's a handful of these guys in these first three rounds that, I almost wonder if Keelan Rutledge is someone that could be available when they pick in the third, or if they trade back at one of these, that I think would fit really well with what they do. The centers, I'm not sure. Do you draft a center and, protect yourself? I think that makes some sense. You know how I feel about Logan Jones. If you watched the combine, and he just saw his stock skyrocket. So if he's sitting there in the 4th or 5th. That's someone that I think makes a lot of sense. There's a handful of tackles that are being, like Brian Parker is projected more as a guard, moving in from tackle. He could be had maybe in the 4th round. So like those sort of players in terms of how you would fill that guard position, I'm comfortable with. Who else? Zion Young. I love those heavy-handed defensive ends. Lee Hunter as a nose, I think would free up some fun stuff. Put him out there with Tart or Caldwell. Pons, I really like at corner. So like for me, it's hard to go past the first 2 rounds. It's just there's so much stuff that goes on. I like Derek Moore at edge, the Michigan player. That I could totally see making sense in the 2nd round if he ends up sliding to, or I should say, if they trade back or if they trade out of the 1 and pick up an extra 2, something like that. I could see that coming together. So there's a handful as I'm just kind of looking through the list. Let's run another one of these mock drafts real quick, see if we get lucky. And if Ioane is there, draft for needs, let's go less. And what do we got? Wow. Ioane gone to the Lions at 17. Yeah. I mean, in this situation, I've got McNeil Warren. I said we need a safety. He's probably the best player on the board. Omar Cooper, I love. He's kind of fits that mold, just strong hands, just physical receiver. But you kind of already have that in Trey Harris. Caden McDonald be interesting on the interior. TJ Parker's probably the guy I would take. Again, I just find myself kind of with the same. Now, here's a couple trades. All right, the Bears want to jump up at 25, and the Texans want to jump up from 28. So can I get 28 and 69 for 22? 46%, maybe not. Like, that's a deal I would do, and then you drop back to 28, and you grab one of the guards. And now you've added another day 2 pick at 69. You're picking at 55, 69, and 86, and now you can kind of see how that can all come together. I think Vidal's probably RB2, Brandon. I think that's just because of the pass pro. I think Keaton Mitchell is more of your, let's do some fun stuff, man. Let's get some jet sweeps and some motions and some of these explosives. So I think Vidal is still kind of your RB2. Let's see what else. 4th round, worth it when you have huge needs. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we talked about, right? Do you want to trade a 4th for, would I have traded a 4th round pick for Elton Jenkins? Yeah. Personally, I would have. That's me. So, and I think and I think it's the school of front office that Joe comes from. No one has had more comp picks than the Ravens. Now you can dig into what they've done with those comp picks. Charlie Kohler was a comp pick, but otherwise, there's really not a lot there. Trying to think who else was. I think Likely was a comp pick too, so that's another good one. So tight ends they're good with. Outside of that, there's really not a lot there. Herbert reached another level. Yes, I think Herbert. I think about what he looked like, and I know there's some people that disagree with this, man, but I thought that rookie year was special. And I thought Steichen, who didn't have complete authority over the offense, I do think there was some meddling in what he was doing at times that kind of derailed it a little bit. But I think the world of Shane as a play caller, and I thought they made some sweet music together. So I do think with McDaniel that we're going to see another level. I really, really Bleav that. I don't think McDaniel is not so much backyard style. It's more, I've got play calls that are going to give us opportunities. If you can make the throws, this is going to be open. You kind of think about Kyle Shanahan and the Super Bowl, and Jimmy Garoppolo just couldn't make the throw, right? Play call was perfect. Here you go. We've got this play beat. Let's go win the Super Bowl. Can't connect. Herbert's going to connect on all of those. He's one of, if not the most talented thrower in the league. So I do think he's going to take a jump this year. Yeah. High stakes. More schemes to the outside for Omarion. Yeah, no question. I think that was, especially in the New England game, they were soft on the edges, and you saw that in the Super Bowl repeatedly. I don't know why they didn't attack the edges. They just didn't. It didn't make any sense to me. Daryl, or maybe it's Lynn, one of the two. Which guard do you like in round 2? Vega won't be there in the first. Yeah, we kind of talked about that. So I think you can trade back if there's a tackle there at 22 or a wide receiver that someone wants to jump up and get, and you could trade back to the back end of the first round or the top of the second round. I think the Pregnon and Basantis come into play. I think Dunker could be there, kicking him inside from tackle to guard. We know what Iowa produces. So I'd be comfortable with any of those. I think those three would firmly be in play at a trade back for the first two. And then I do think Dunker will be there as well. And I think Rutledge could be there in the third. I think Parker could be there maybe at the back. You can maneuver up and down the board to maybe get any of those guys. I got the Chris Paul thing wrong. Sorry. Here we go. Kenilworth, England. Peter, wish I could listen to the games. Other position than O-line and edge, do you see at 22? I think wide receiver, tight end, we talked about that. Safety, we talked about that as well. So I do think there's a lot of those that come into play. I don't think Ganneman's going to be there, but I do think McNeil Warren could be there. And I think that's someone that plays a style that Chris O'Leary can certainly sign up for. I don't think any of your top corners are going to be there. I think McCoy and Delane will be gone. Terrell is an interesting one. Obviously, good. You've got the stock to lean on. So that would be an interesting one if they wanted to go that direction, because I do think they could certainly add a corner. I think that's probably, if Mekhi Lemon slides, if they'd be comfortable with the medicals on Jordan Tyson. But that kind of goes back to my whole, do you really want to take Tyson with your first round pick and just kind of roll those dice? Hopefully that there's a fun one. DJ's mock had Sadiq sliding to 22 draft. I do think that he would certainly be in the conversation, because, man, that'd be fun. I think just adding that to the mix would be really, really fun for Mike McDaniel and Justin Herbert to be able to play with. I don't think you go best available OL. I think if Ioane is there, you snatch him up. And if not, then, I don't know how they feel about Proctor, but that would be a Mike McDaniel conversation. He would be the other guy that could be available there that you consider tackle, guard flexibility, protect yourself a little bit with the health of Alt and Slater. 9:30 for us at the moment. Beautiful. So 9:45 at the desk pretending to work. Appreciate that. Appreciate you, Wyatt. Sadiq would be amazing. If weapons pick at 22, Sadiq, one of the wide receivers, I think it would depend, Ben. I think it would depend on, like I said, Carnell Tate ain't going to slide. I don't think Mekhi Lemon's going to slide. I do think you could have Tyson, Cooper, and Boston all there. And I do think, and Concepcion, I think, could go at the back end of the first round. So I think all of those wide receivers could go in the first round. Would you consider him at 22? Maybe. Most definitely, I think you could. Medicals on Tyson will go a long way. Chargers relying on rookies to protect Herbert. They could, yeah. I mean, like, if it's Ioane, then I'm all for that, Joe. If they draft Ioane, I drop him in next to Slater. And my gosh, you want to talk about bully ball? Those guys are going to wreck dudes. Ioane is the best offensive lineman in the draft, period. Like, he's a guard, so he's not going to get drafted ahead of the tackles. But, yeah, I'd be totally fine with that. And I think we've seen it. Gray Zabel was a rookie last year, and he was a vital cog in that machine that was the Seattle offensive line. I mean, he was at times their best offensive lineman as a rookie. So how did Joe Alt look as a rookie? Sensational. I mean, he was a Pro Bowl level tackle as a rookie. So, yeah, I have no problem dropping a rookie to protect Herbert. What else we got? I'd like to see Joe make a trade with the Vikings for Grenard. I guess. Sorry, man. I don't know why. Trade rumors. I don't know what he would fetch. Let's see. What did they say? Kind of what I think with only 5 picks, that's the only thing I don't feel like. What do we got here? Outset, they're doing this on their terms, not going to trade them. I mean, I'm fine with it. I just don't know what the cost is. That's probably what would come into play with only 5 picks and knowing how much they value this comp pick thing they've got going. If you are to interpret that right now, that's the only question I would have there is what do they want for him if they've held on to him this long And is it something they'd be willing to pay? Ty Simpson is not being taken before 22 on any of my mocks. I can't see that happening. But you never know. All it takes is one team to fall in love with them. Let's see what else we got. Coming up at the end of this, and I think we'll wrap it. So, going to get Tony Jeff? Yes, we will get Tony Jefferson on a pod. We love him. He's such a fun conversation. Let's see. Any trading 2027 one based on what you hear about that draft? No, I don't think they would trade for a future one. I think they'd be trading for multiple picks then in this draft if they traded out of 22. If they trade from 22 to 28 or 22 to 32, and then pick up an extra 2 based on how far back you've got to go, or pick up a 2 and a 3, like all of those things is kind of what I'm talking about. If you trade back to 32, can you pick up 32 like I did in that? If I just pull up the mock draft simulator here, kind of what I was talking about. Let's see, Chargers. Let's do a 3-round, enter draft, and go. And so here's the trades. We only have one offered, and it's not going to happen. So, and I think a lot of it depends on who's on the board. Like in this case, Blake Miller's still there, Caden Proctor's there. That sort of, we'd be, Cooper, like we said, the wide receiver, Boston, the wide receiver. This board would not break their way that well. So it's kind of what we're talking about. If the board breaks where there's some serious tackle talent and some serious edge talent that a team wants to jump up and get, like the Falcons did last year, embarrassingly for Pierce and how that thing turned out based on what teams knew about him, then yeah, that's what you're doing. You're trading back, taking their 1, taking their 2, and now you can really build some depth along that offensive line. So, all right, man. You guys, do I think there's a possibility this will be the last one? Giving up future draft capital to trade for Ioane? I don't think so. I don't think you would do that for a guard, especially based on how they've traded guard in this free agent market. As special of a player as I think he is, I can't quite see them doing that. So, all right. Wow, that was a quick 50 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Lo will be back next week, and I think we're going to get a special guest, too. Very excited about it. But I appreciate y'all. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully my voice wasn't too grating and annoying like I find it to be, which is why it's hard for me to listen to the podcast back. But appreciate y'all. Have a wonderful Wednesday, or in the case of you, Ben, Thursday. And we'll be back again next week. Thanks for checking out Bleav in Chargers, and a big thank you to our friends at FanDuel. I am going to go paddle out and surf for a while until the sun goes down, probably like 2 hours. And that's going to be great. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.